Hello and welcome to the Three Wheel Podcast. This is your host, Danny Ryan, and today I have Bruce Harple here with me, the VP of Delivery. Did I hit that?
You hit it right, Danny.
That kind of rhymes too. I'm Bruce. I'm the VP of Delivery.
Yeah.
All right. So you have do an amazing job with the tasks that we give to you. Tommy and I were talking earlier. And we think we might have more projects than we do have people, and that's kind of crazy.
That's a great thing. We love it.
We'll take it. You've got a lot on your plate and managing all these different projects. It's amazing what you do, Bruce.
Hey, thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
You betcha. So today we wanted to talk about migrating to Office 365, and I think it sounds so simple, right? And you probably run into this all the time. Well, we've got our, we've set up our initial sites in Office 365, and it's all done, and there's not very much to this, and there is so much you need to be thinking about. And when we talked earlier, you said sort of the overall theme for this podcast is be prepared. Be prepared. I guess that's the Scouts motto, right?
That's exactly right, Danny. Yeah. And that's exactly where it came from. I was a Boy Scout, so
nice.
I still apply that really basic, fundamental kind of motto of the Scouts of being prepared. And I think it really truly applies to these migrations to Office 365.
Well, get us started here. What should we first be thinking about?
Yeah, so what I thought I'd kind of start out with is just, really a lot of times what we see happening with customers as they're looking at migrations is they really underestimate, the effort and the complexity of these migrations.
Yeah.
And I kind of try to think through, why is that? What are some of the things that lead them to believe it's going to be an easy process to move content from point A to point B up in the cloud? And so some of the things I was thinking about is, and we're guilty of this as well. One of the things is we assume that all these migration tools that are out there in the marketplace will automatically just, migrate all the content.
Yep.
And in reality of it is, that's not true. Will they get you 80, 90% there? Absolutely. But there's a lot of content that won't migrate successfully using all these tools. So that's one thing I think people don't anticipate and don't plan for and aren't prepared for.
And so what do you create a mitigation plan for that type of content, or you see how important it is for it to move over? Or?
Yeah, one of the things that we'll talk about later on is kind of the concept of running a proof of concept early on.
Gotcha.
To really vet out where there are gaps in those migration tools and the automation, which really kind of leads to the next thought around why people underestimate these migrations. And the other thing we've seen is that people, they really don't fully understand their current state environments. I mean, they understand they've got, content stored in SharePoint, but depending on how much governance they had in place, how closely they really monitor and manage those environments, they kind of get that, SharePoint sprawl, and people, take advantage of SharePoint. They stand up a lot of sites. There's a lot of content out there, even to the point where there gets to be a lot of customizations, whether it's third-party, components that get added in. But they really don't truly understand, especially in a large company, you may not understand all the business scenarios out there and everything everybody's doing, to use SharePoint as a collaboration document management platform. So a lot of people really underestimate how big, how widely used, and the depth and breadth of that usage.
Talking this through, typically the way people move out to Office 365 is they put in Exchange first, and then they start looking at other things, right?
That's right.
I could see people saying, okay, well, Exchange was easy enough. Exchange is just like moving your email, all your email over, and there's not very many ways of customizing Exchange.
That's
right.
I
could see them sort of making the misstep of thinking, oh, we've already moved our Exchange stuff over. SharePoint's just going to be as simple as that as well.
Yeah, and the other thing, really that where SharePoint becomes more complex is if there are customizations.
Yep.
Right, and again, not every IT organization understands the extent of all those customizations, because these customizations could have been implemented over years, right, of using SharePoint as their content collaboration platform. So that's another thing is I think people don't fully understand how much customization is out there, and what's the purpose of that customization, how important to it is it excuse me, to the business, because you've got to make some pretty important decisions about how you're going to remediate all those customizations.
Yep. Makes sense. What's next?
I think the other thing is, in many cases, IT doesn't really set realistic expectations with the business. Again, they think a migration is just, I'm going to take this content from point A, put it in point B. Well, at the end of the day, point B looks a lot different than point A, right? Even in the Microsoft ecosystem, SharePoint Online has got some differences than SharePoint On-Prem. And assuming that will be a simple transition for users, is also where I think customers tend to underestimate the effort to really make sure those customers understand that maybe all content won't get migrated, that maybe the user experience is going to be a little bit different. So really making sure that they set expectations with the business and get them actively engaged is really important. And also customers, a lot of times they don't have a strategy for really branding Office 365, right? So the user experience kind of out of the box is fine, but there's no sizzle to it. There's no branding as far as your corporate identity. So I think in a lot of cases people don't invest the time to think about that user experience, and what do we need to do to really optimize that experience and get the business engaged early on in that process.
Yep.
And then the last thing, and it's related to that, is just I think many times organizations don't put enough time and investment into having an effective communication plan, that just talks about the schedule for migration, the impact, what do we have to do to retrain, the business community, helping them understand, what content has been moved, has not been moved, how to find their new content, etc. So those as I think through some of the challenges and some of the things that we see companies a lot of times not think about, and causes them to kind of miss the mark on their migrations being successful.
I could see that, especially that communications and setting expectations inside the organization being critical for, especially if you're moving from some other platform like Jive into Office 365, that there's some level setting that needs to occur inside the business.
Yeah, because it's a whole different user experience when you're working in SharePoint Online versus a Jive social and collaborative platform.
What's next?
So let's do this. So what I'd like to talk about now is how can companies be better prepared?
Okay.
Right. So let's just kind of talk through that. I'm going to first start and just talk about planning, right, which is pretty simple, pretty basic. Everybody gets that. You need to have a plan. So the things I want to talk about are, the first thing, and Danny, I know you've experienced this. I know you tell customers this all the time. You really, for these migrations, you really need to start your planning at least 6 months in advance. We can't tell you the number of times where, customers are moving from a Jive platform to a SharePoint platform, or there's an impending, merger, an impending acquisition where, now they're going to move to an integrated, collaboration platform, and they start thinking about that 6 weeks before that event occurs. And quite simply, there's not enough time, right, in 6 weeks for a big enterprise, to consolidate and migrate all this content and have a great user experience, at the end of that. So, I know, Danny, during the sales cycle, you talk about that, and it's so critical, to really, and I'm saying start at least 6 months.
I say eight. I say 8 to 10.
There you go.
And I have that. I have that. It's up on our site, 8 to 10, and now that's ideal because I can typically I try to put together an action plan for making the move, and my template is really starting to make some of those steps, 8 months out to be successful. So what ends up happening sometimes is that if they bring us in too late, we have to wait another year because they're typically annual renewals. And you just say, guys, we're not going to be able to do this in this time frame. We don't have that luxury with mergers, unfortunately. But with folks who are saying, oh, look at this upcoming year, if we focused in on Office 365 and maybe merged the Jive into it, then we could save this money. But if you come too late, there's not a whole lot we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the next thing I had, from a planning perspective, in many cases, a lot of these migrations, there is a business driver. It might be a license for a platform that's expired. There's an acquisition, a merger, coming up, or it's just somebody's on an older platform and they need to move to a newer version of that platform. But so a lot of these I mentioned, tend to be IT initiated projects. Mm-hmm. But I can't express how important it is and how critical it is to have the business, totally aligned with IT. There needs to be an IT executive sponsor and a business executive sponsor, and those two sponsors really need to be aligned and attached at the hip, because it can't be. You won't be successful if it's an IT-driven project. The business has to step up, has to take ownership, has to be engaged. Mm-hmm. Many times we see that not taking place, and that's critical.
Yep, absolutely.
The next thing on my list in planning is, I call it kind of I'll call them migration principles, right? These principles are, things and decisions that really guide the team, in the decision-making process, the investments they're going to make in automation, the investments they're going to make in remediation, and how they're going to really set proper expectations with the end users. So, and when I say, migration principles, kind of the areas that I think about are, the content type and content mapping and prioritization. So from a content perspective, what content is in, what content's out. So what's going to get migrated, what's not going to get migrated. What are we going to just archive and put on the back burner, right? Handling customizations. What's the principle? What's the migration principle for how we're going to deal with customizations? Are they just out of scope? Do we come up with a remediation plan and alternatives with cost benefits? And then there's a decision-making process. What guidance is there for the team? What about an issue remediation? So what are the guiding principles, right, around the amount of time we invest in remediating issues? And many times that it needs to be tied to how many people is it impacting, how much content is it impacting. Set those parameters up front so the team can make quick decisions around remediation.
Yep.
And then really just looking at, automation versus manual. In some cases, it's easier and more costly or less costly just to do a manual migration. An example of that might be video content. Mm-hmm. Right? A lot of customers will put video content out in SharePoint. They might have it out in a platform like Jive. And, the number of videos might be in the hundreds, right? Not the thousands. Well, if it's hundreds of videos, it's really not that difficult of an effort to really download those videos to a file share from one platform and then manually upload those to another file share, right, to another platform. So, in some cases, it makes more sense to do a manual migration. So up front, coming up with the principles and the criteria for helping the team decide, mm-hmm. Where do we invest in automation versus what's manual.
Nice.
So, that was kind of my migration principles piece. And the next two areas are, kind of, I think things everybody understands, and most people do to a certain level, but the first one is really you do have to understand your current state. Like I said, depending on an organization's level of governance, there could be a lot of SharePoint sprawl or Jive sprawl. A lot of Jive places, SharePoint sites that there's no way IT knows everything that those sites are being used for, how much content is there, how many binary documents are there, how many collaborative documents, how many wiki pages, exactly what's there, how many workflows are there, part of that solution, how many web parts have been added, etc. So critical, right, to get an inventory of what you have. You have to understand that current state. And what you're really looking for is the exceptions, right? You're really looking for the customizations, because that's where most of your remediation is going to be.
Yep.
And then the other part is kind of planning out your future state, right? So, when you're going to Office 365, it's not a simple lift and shift like it might be if I was going from one on-prem environment to another. I really need to think through in SharePoint Online, what is my information architecture? What's that going to look like? What about my taxonomy? Because it's a great opportunity to really look at how can we, based on understanding my current state, how can I fine-tune that for a better, search experience and a better navigational experience in my future state. We think it's a great time to make those kind of decisions, not to over-engineer it, but to look for how can we simplify, how can we get more consistent across this new platform. And then, the other thing is branding. I mentioned that earlier, right? So SharePoint Online, not branded, right, when you get there. And most people want to have a branded experience. They want some kind of a better experience. They want it to look and feel like their corporate brand or their divisional brand. And there's different ways to do branding in Office 365, right? You can have there's probably 4 to 5 different levels of branding. As you kind of go up that chain, you get more and more into customizations, which are risky, right, in Office 365, right? Changing master pages in Office 365 is a risky thing to do because, Microsoft could put out updates to SharePoint Online that could break those master pages. So, but it's important to think about that, plan that out, and then just really picking a migration tool. We actually would suggest Metalogics. That's kind of our tool of choice. We found that tool to be, that tool suite to be very robust, and again meets, most of the migration needs. Not all, as I said, but you will need a tool, to get from an on-prem environment to Office 365. So those are my thoughts around, planning and kind of what we've learned. Those are kind of the high points of that.
Awesome. What do we have to wrap us up here?
So next is really, I want to kind of talk about execution of migration. So one of the things that we've found is you hear a lot about different development implementation processes. You hear the terms agile, waterfall, Kanban, and quite honestly, what we've learned is that migrations are all the above, right? So there's different parts of a migration where you're going to be agile. Because you're learning stuff each day, you're identifying issues that you didn't think existed, you're remediating those issues, and you're iterating through your migrations. There are parts that are pure waterfall. I got to get step done first before I can move on to step 2. So I guess my point there is, don't box yourself into one methodology or one process. Be willing to adapt and to flex, because you're going to have to, right? It's just the nature of migrations.
Scrum Bonfile.
There you go. I like it. So other things. Now, these are just things kind of for people to think about, right? That will help your execution become more predictable. One is, do early proof of concepts of the migration. And what do I mean by proof of concept? So a proof of concept is take, 1 to 4 sites or places, and using the tools, run migration. All right, and then assess, that migration. What worked, what didn't work, what are the gaps? What you're really looking for is the gaps. What's not getting migrated, and why is it not getting migrated? And then really just trying to then, the next thing is then, plugging the gaps in those migration tools. So once you run that proof of concept, you'll see real clearly the gaps. And then you got to figure out, how do I plug those gaps? Is it further automation that I do through my own manual scripting? Is it manual migration, right? Am I just going to manually migrate content? Or am I just going to say, there's not enough occurrences of that type of content. Let's just archive it. It's not going to get migrated. Or we tell the users, we're not going to migrate it. If you want to go get it, you've got X number of days to go get that content and move it to your new place. So, but that early POC, again, with migrations, you're just, each step of the way, you're trying to reduce risk, become more predictable, right? Because at the beginning, you have risks, you don't have a high level of predictability. You've got to get through the POC. Now I've learned some things, I've eliminated some risk, and I'm getting more predictable. And then the next step is what most people do, and that's pilot migrations, right? And this is really where you got to get the business involved, right? And we're really, again, we want the business users to look at that, that future state, right? Now your content, it's all been moved to SharePoint Online. Mm-hmm. We want you to look and see what's that user experience like. Can you find that content? How easy is it for you to search and find the content you have out there? Which is good. Again, you're going to find issues. Some things are not going to work. Some things will be broken. Some content will be missing, or it won't look the way they want it to look. But the beauty is you're finding that early, right? Mm-hmm. Again, you're trying to get down to that next level of reducing risk and getting to a more predictable end state. So it's a good thing. And you really want to, in those pilot migrations, so a pilot migration isn't just one. I don't just so pilot migrations, maybe it's 12 sites or 12 places. I'm not going to do that just one time. I'm going to do the pilot. I'm going to get the feedback. I'm going to make adjustments to my tools, to my scripts, to the branding and user experience. I'm going to migrate again and ask the users to look at it again. I'm going to get the feedback, and I'm going to migrate again.
It's almost like you're versioning the migration.
Yeah, I mean, you're going through pilot until eventually, we actually like customers to sign off. So we like to get to the point of, I accept this future state, look, feel, the way the content's organized, etc. So, those iterative migrations are important. And the other thing that you want to do during that is really capture the time to migrate, right? Because now, before we start the production migrations, we want to have some way to predict how long it's going to take to pull all that content from my current state and push it into a cloud-based platform, right? That's really critical in that predictability.
So you're able to at least extrapolate off the data that you have from the pilots to do that.
Absolutely.
Yep, makes sense.
Absolutely. And then just kind of a couple points as we get into the production migrations. I mean, we're big believers in breaking a big problem domain down into little pieces, right? And production migrations can be very, very big. So we're big believers in kind of breaking the migration up into batches or iterations, right? And you can work with customers to prioritize, what content is most important. Maybe I migrate that first. But break it up into smaller iterations. That also enables you, in a smaller amount of content, to validate the success of each iterative migration and to remediate any issues, right? Because again, it's all about risk reduction and predictability, and trying to move that dial each time. So you want to inspect and adapt after each iteration, and then at the end, you really want to be prepared to run what we call delta migrations. So it may take a while to actually extract content and push that content to the new platform. And there's different ways to mitigate that. Some people will actually lock down the source system, right, and disable people using that system. Others say, I can't do that. It's mission critical. I can't stop people from continuing to use it. And in that case, you got to come back and kind of pick up all the changes, right? And you may have to push those changes. So, be prepared and think about, depending on your migration approach and strategy, think about having that delta migration as something that is a way to mitigate that kind of incremental need to pull new content.
Nice.
So, that was my part on execution, and then lastly, Danny, is just overall communication and governance, and that's that's so key and so critical. And again, it's all about setting expectations. I mean, Danny, we're a big believer that a good customer for us is an educated customer.
Yep, absolutely.
They understand what's going to happen, how they're going to be impacted, what their day-to-day interaction is going to look like and feel like and be like. So, that's all about communication and getting them prepared for this new world. and the new user experience that they're going to have, and understanding how they could find their content. So, that's just so key, is that the education piece, and making sure they are ready, and they understand, and expectations have been set. And then, especially as you go into SharePoint Online, governance is critical. If you don't have a governance plan, and a lot of people say they do, but they really don't, or if they do, they don't really use it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as you go into these cloud-based environments, they actually enforce a bit more governance, because it's not as easy to just stand things up and create sites and create places. So, but governance is really important. Really kind of having a way that you're going to govern those cloud-based environments so that they stay structured. They stay in a controlled environment, but yet you still give users the flexibility to do the things they need to do to run their business. So I'll kind of close it with that as my kind of last thought related to this. And
well, this has been great. I think just for somebody preparing to make the move to Office 365 / SharePoint Online, I think there's a lot of great points that you brought out into this. I know we've been doing a lot of these projects over the last year, and I foresee us in this upcoming year helping out a lot of people with this as well. So hopefully this gives them some insights and some things to think about when preparing to make the move. So I know these are tough projects, and it sounds like the team is using a lot of things that they've learned from their app dev background with versioning and sort of chunking up things, and really using that background as an advantage for these migrations. I love how flexible you guys are, and learn and then share it, and then go and roll it out into the next project we go after. You guys are doing a great job.
Yeah, absolutely, Danny. And every environment is different. Every customer is different, and there's always new experiences for us, and new things we learn, and we love it because we get to kind of capture that and reuse it and apply it, on the next migration. So that's the kind of stuff we enjoy. We enjoy the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
We enjoy making sure that our customers are successful in that. That at the end of the day, we're very committed to making sure those end users have a great experience.
Mm-hmm.
When they get to SharePoint Online.
Yep.
That's we have a lot of passion around that, as you know.
Yeah. But one of the things I first talk when I talk with people about migrations is you could do everything perfectly in the migration and get everything migrated over, exactly like it should be. But if you didn't have a communication plan, if you didn't set expectations with your end users around this, it would be considered a failure. So I'm glad you wrapped up with that, because I think that's something important that we end up coaching our customers on how to do that effectively. So that's really important.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you. If you've made it through to this point, we're almost at 30 minutes. I think I've used up all my marketing budget on the transcription for this, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But thank you so much for taking the time. If you're making the move, obviously, to SharePoint Online and want someone with a lot of experience to do this, we've got a lot of good things that we've learned through the years, and it's a one-time thing. That people are going through it, and it really doesn't make sense to using your internal folks to learn all the lessons that we've learned. Outsource this, and we can coach you through the whole thing and point you to the right tools and the right ways of doing this, so that migration is a success. And so we'd love to hear from you. Come to the Three-Will site and come through the Contact Us page, and you'll interact with Bruce and I on an estimate and all the good stuff, and we'll get you moved over so that you can take advantage of all the wonderful things that Microsoft is doing in Office 365. So thanks again, Bruce, for taking the time to do this.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed it, Danny.
Great. Everybody have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.